Welcome to the 11 Days of Global Unity Summit as we celebrate the 20th anniversary of 11 Days of Global Unity at We the World. My name is Jana Larsen, and I am the Human Resources Administrator and Deputy Director. Today, I am pleased to present Denise Scotto and her guests for one of our panel presentations on our theme of human rights. For the full 11-day schedule, you can register for free by going to we.net. You can also see replays of recordings, and you can make a donation to support us at We the World. Now, let's bring in Denise and her guests. Welcome,
Thank you.
Denise.
Thank you so much, Jana. I appreciate being here, and I know that the 11 days is something that Rick, through We the World, has been holding for 20 years, and he's been so dedicated to promoting the values of the United Nations. We and our guests today have worked with him and know him and his work, and the dedication that he has had to really educate people about the various meaning of human rights and what that looks like is something that we're grateful for. And to have this opportunity to do that on this special anniversary makes it just all the more special. So we really appreciate it. We salute Rick, We the World, and everyone who's part of his team during this special occasion and special anniversary.
Thank you for being here. I have a brief introduction for you I can do, and then you can bring in your guests. Would that be all right?
Perfect.
Okay. Well, Denise Scotto is an attorney. She's an international policy advisor and leader of various communities at the UN. She founded the International Day of Yoga Committee at the UN, emphasizing the values of yoga that underpin the work of the UN. Denise has also been actively involved in promoting equality, social inclusion, and sustainable development within the UN, and has influenced government policies and legislation relating to civic engagement. So I'm so glad you can be here, and please bring in your guests.
Thank you so much. It's my honor to bring in people who are colleagues, but beyond that, who are friends who I know for many years through the work in the greater UN community. So I'd like now to introduce Carl Murrel and Dr. Kusumati Pedersen, who are joining us today. I've had the honor of being involved with both of them for many years in different capacities, advocating at UN headquarters, but also doing a lot of advocacy as well as holding conversations, dialogues for more understanding, interfaith understanding, intercultural understanding, and things like that. How to engage better within the UN and how to bring the UN to other people. And that's what we're doing today. We're bringing the UN in some way to other people, to people like you who are joining us. So we really appreciate the opportunity. So before we begin, I want to just take this opportunity now so that I can let you know a little bit more about my friends today who are joining us. Dr. Kusumati Pedersen is a professor emerita of religious studies at St. Francis College. She's been part of the global interfaith movement for 40 years, and she's co-chair of the Interfaith Center of New York, a trustee of the Parliament of the World Religions, and a founding member of the Parliament's Climate Action Task Force. She's also a co-chair of the Climate Working Group on the Committee of Religious NGOs at the UN and serves on the advisory boards of the Center for Earth Ethics, the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology, and the Center for Ecumenical and Interreligious Engagement at Seattle University. She's a well-known author and someone who I know has really been valued within the UN and outside of the UN. Our next special guest is Carl Murrel, who is the principal representative to the United Nations for the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States. I refer as the Baha'is, as many of us shorthand in the community do. He engages in discourses that focus on the advancement of women, race unity, and human rights. He's been a member of the Parliament of the World Religions Board of Trustees and has served as the president of the Committee of Religious NGOs at the United Nations. He's also served on the advisory board of A Call to Men, and he and I worked very closely years and years ago when we were both in the executive board of the NGO Committee on the Status of Women. So I'd like to welcome you both, Carl and Kusumita, to our discussion today. So we've been involved with matters at the UN for a long time now. Not that I want you to feel old, but I bring it up because um, we have a special perspective of a wide angle lens. I know that I've seen things from 25 years from the Beijing Conference for Women that was held in Beijing, China. And now we're here in 2024, where there's a real regression in many countries, including the United States, on the issue when we talk about human rights for women and girls. So, if I can just ask in a couple of sentences how you see human rights today through the long term lens. And whoever would like to start, I would love for you to jump right in.
You know, the professor is one of my trusted advisors, and she's an elder of mine, and she always gets to go first when we're together.
Well, thank you, Carl, and thank you, Denise, for your introduction. And you've given us a lead in through the issue of women and girls. And I think that in many ways, what we're experiencing now is the backlash. And the fundamental, one of the fundamental principles of human rights is equality of human dignity. And dignity means inherent worth, means every human being is worthy of respect. And the principle of non-discrimination is you don't, their dignity is not less because of race, religion, color, nationality, or sex or gender. And the equality of dignity and human rights is a kind of recent concept in human history. I mean, you can trace it in the world's religions, but in social practice, it hasn't been fulfilled. It hasn't been observed. And so it's actually, equality is a radical concept, and it's struggling to be, manifested. And patriarchy, male domination, is one of the main forms of inequality. We all know that. And people who have privilege and power don't give it up easily. So the backlash is happening. It's not just happening, however, with regard to women and girls. Of course, it's happening with regard to race, ethnicity, religion, and other, dividing lines. So that's a sort of a gloomy picture. I mean, I want to say some promising and and good things about human rights and also the rights of nature before we conclude.
Well, absolutely. And I appreciate you broadening the conversation beyond women and girls. It's absolutely true. Um, Carl, would you like to weigh in on that?
Sure, I right before the we went on live, we were talking about AI and technology, and I think maybe things aren't getting worse. What they are getting is publicity. So now our local friends who had silence to their oppression are now able to broadcast them. And that is a different world we live in. That is one of the pros of technology. Um, I published something recently on my LinkedIn feed about the unfortunate what happened with the human rights when the president of the United States took over in what was it, Afghanistan? What was the country where that was unfortunate because there had been some with armed guards, but they had still that allowed women in that country to, and now that has absolutely gone back. So that's one example of going back. But there are many instances, unfortunately, in our publicity world where people doing things on the ground that are making progress don't get publicized. And there are many people that we know, including one of the people in our environment here at the UN, some youth who are doing things that are having human rights positives. So the headlines that have to be captivating so that the people who broadcast them make money and get attention are maybe not the things that are happening that we should know about, that are growing humanity and making this troubling time have positives that we don't see.
I appreciate that thoughtful response, and I'd like to just unpack it a little bit. For those of you who don't know, Carl is such a gender champion, and at the same time, he is also a champion for men and boys, also in terms of how to really become more empowered in their own self and also to be partners with women and girls. So that's one thing I just like to put up front because I want to just briefly comment about what he said about the situation of women and girls in Afghanistan. We just celebrated 3 years, and I don't like to use that word celebrate. I should say, and let me reframe it, we marked 3 years of Taliban coming back into power. And we know in this amount of time, women and girls have been now resorted to being chattel or property of their male fathers, their brothers, their husbands. Women don't have a life. Girls don't have the promise of dreams, of a future where they can see themselves individuating or being empowered to do whatever they would like to do in terms of growing and experiencing what it is just to have a life where they're free. As Kusumati said, the UN Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights really talk about the equality of men and women. And they talk about people, men and women, being free and equal in dignity and in rights. So the Taliban now is not allowing girls to go to school, women to work outside the home. They're having forced and early marriages. I could go on and on about that. It's called gender apartheid. This is what the UN is calling it now. It's gender apartheid, a new way of approaching the situation. This is such a dire human rights phenomena that we see, and it really breaks my heart because when I was working in the UN system as a staff person, when the Taliban took control it the first time in the late 1990s, I was working with UN staff to identify appropriate women who could take part in the Loya Jirga, which was the constitutional court, to write a new constitution to entrench equal rights for women and girls. So, Carl, you're absolutely right in backtracking in so many ways. This is such a clear example. And yet, at the same time, you talk about the positive things that are happening on the ground. And I would say, from my standpoint, as being an attorney and someone who's worked in the public international law arena for years, I see there are more and more mechanisms that can be used to bring up human rights violations and to possibly hold people accountable. We have the International Criminal Court, we have special representatives of the Secretary General, particularly in sexual violence and war and armed conflict. I could go on and on and on with that. But I think you're right. The way society has been changing with media, technology, communications, information technology, and even AI gives rise to highlighting the positive stuff that's going around and can give inspiration and hope. So that I think is something that's an important takeaway that maybe we could highlight even more as we continue our work. And I'd like to also highlight how in the UN we had a very close colleague of ours who just retired, Hawa Diallo, who was involved with the NGOs and creating the special task force on youth, a whole group of youth representatives who were advocating in the UN system in particular times at different commission sessions to have certain outcomes, to create certain high-level panels, to really show that young people are agents of change now, not today, but they are really being productive and successful members of society. And they really know what they want, and they know that there is a world out there that could be more harmonious and more equal and to be treated with dignity and respect. This task force was, made up of so many youngsters, and I mean, late teens, early 20s, people from different countries, speaking different languages, different educational backgrounds, things like that. And I know Carl knows people on that task force too. So, it was wonderful to watch and to see their accomplishments and their achievements. So, I don't know, Carl, is there something in particular you'd like to bring up from that task force?
Well, my colleague Rosaleni Ubinius was one of the first co-chairs of um, that youth entity. It no longer exists, so that says something in and of itself. But what was interesting was I was on an event recently, just this week, I believe, earlier, um, by a Congo and another group, and they had a young people's panel, and they asked them about young people in the future. And the Kekishan, a colleague of ours on the Parliament of World's Religions Board, said, "Well, I think when we talk about young people and youth, we should talk about now, the currently, what they are doing now, because they're not waiting for the future for things to happen. But a lot of the conversation of the elders about youth is about the future. And so when we have conversations about the youth, we need to be talking about what they can contribute to society at this moment. And they are ready and willing and are doing it."
Yeah, that's a good point. I know that the youth from that task force, they are trying to mobilize themselves to be independent to continue that work. And, we would love to see that so that they continue their efforts. And I think it's great that you brought this whole recent meeting where Kusumita and I also were in attendance, and Kusumita was a speaker up to the fore, because one of the things that the topic centered around was this idea of global citizenship and a sense of ethics, and how can we achieve greater harmony and unity, as humankind, as one human family in that way. And a component to that you brought up was Kekishan and her work. And I know Kusamita has been very involved in work relating to advocacy for the environment. So when we talk about human rights, I think that it's important also to broaden the concept and acknowledge what's happening, from back when the UN Charter and the Declaration was written. Where are we today with our understanding and the involvement of human rights? Is it just civil and political rights anymore? I mean, we've come so far. So maybe, Kusamita, you'd like to share a little bit from your end.
Thank you so much. Well, something historic happened in July 2022, which was that the General Assembly of the United Nations recognized the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment as a basic human right. And there are very few basic human rights. You know that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights only has about 30 articles. And the last time a basic human right was recognized was 10 years before that. And that was the right to water and sanitation, which is also environmental in a sense. But the right to a healthy environment had already, and it passed with, I think, 161 votes in favor, none opposed, and 8 abstentions. And the right to a healthy environment is already in the constitutions of over 100 countries and recognized in some way in the legal systems of another 150 countries, so that it's already globally recognized, and it reversed the usual process of advocacy to the UN and then coming out from there. The UN, put its approval on a concept, an ethical and legal concept that's coming globally. And it's very, very historic and important because it widens the vision of what human flourishing is. Like the articles in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights spell out, what is needed for a life that is consistent with human dignity, and everyone has a right to life, liberty, security of person, freedom of expression, all of these different things that pertain to women and girls and to all human beings. But the right to a healthy environment, this affirms that our well-being, human well-being, is not separate from the well-being of the natural world. And a healthy environment has to be healthy in and of itself. It's not just, it has to have its own health in order to be healthy for us. And so it's gesturing in, sort of intimating the rights of nature, which is a whole other movement, which is transcending the human-centeredness or anthropocentrism of human rights. And so I think we're seeing, we're seeing progress. And also the right to a healthy environment has everything to do with what we call environmental justice and environmental racism. And it also enables us to refer to environmental defenders now as human rights defenders as well, because every year almost 200 people lose their lives in defending their environment.
We do know that so many people around the world do lose their lives defending human rights, defending the environment, and that is in and of itself, I don't want to say another category, but another way for us to approach human rights and to approach the way sometimes violations of human rights can be so egregious that people will stop at anything to get what they want, including hard, cold murder of those who are defending human rights, defending the environment, because, part of it, I think, goes back to power and control. And it goes back to what you said at the very beginning, Kusamita, about this concept of patriarchy, you know. And I think that all of us here um, have tried to cultivate a culture of peace and nonviolence in one way or another in the work that we do, and the fact that we have human rights defenders and people who are so involved in caring for the earth and taking that seriously. We've seen that. We've seen that with Wangari Maathai, who was coming to the UN years ago. She started the Greenbelt movement, and how
The first environmentalist, she was the first person to win the Nobel Peace Prize for care for the environment.
thank you for including that. Yes. So, there's so much I think that's interrelated in this. We went so quickly in a short amount of time from one topic to another, but I think that people can understand how complex it is. And I don't know, Carla, if you want to say anything about the work you've been doing with men and boys or cultivating a culture of peace and nonviolence, but you've been a peacemaker yourself in these ways too, So what will you make of it?
You know, when what we're talking about right now is about an environment, a human environment where each and every person is valued. There is no separation based on race or gender or economics. And when we at the UN, us as civil society at the UN, we absolutely can see every day that framework does not exist currently. And when we have these conversations that are on a framework of separation,
Mm.
it makes them almost impossible to be resolved. So the spaces I'm in, all we can do is do the best we can. So one of the things I'm noticing is I've been in a men's talking space when I was young, and now I'm the elder. And one of the things about the young guys I appreciate that's different for males, particularly, is that these guys seek help. They're in therapy or whatnot. At least they are dealing with the stuff that can make masculinity a challenge for humanity. And I appreciate that. When I was coming up, men just did what they did, and have uh they didn't seek assistance, as much as these younger men are. And that's what's out there. Certainly, one of my daughters worked at one of these online therapy places that people can go to now. You don't have to, and so it's there. But still, when I look at humanity, when I look at social media, particularly, people are doing what makes them feel good. They're having their own experiences, which is great, but we need to be having experiences which are our contributions to one another and our communities and our societies, that makes not just our space good for us, but helps everyone around us that we come in touch with. We need to be thinking about that as well as ourselves.
So you brought up a lot about values, the underlying values I think that we share in terms of really having those values of unity and inclusiveness and respect and tolerance, but also working together, collaboration, partnership, solidarity, so that we could really achieve things that make all of us, the collective, feel better, do better, and uplift humankind as a group. And you alluded to this evolution of human consciousness just by these younger gentlemen seeking help. So that's a shift. It may be slow, but it seems to be steady that's happening. And I think that it's about, when we talk about human rights and we talk about human needs, underpinning all of this are certain values that people can come together to really understand why human rights are important, why it's important to safeguard them and to really make sure that everybody enjoys them or has the expression to realize them. So thank you for highlighting that. That's, I think, a really good takeaway, because at the end of it all, the world, is about how can we achieve the evolution of human consciousness so that we really are working together as one humanity, where we really come together for mutual benefit for everyone, and where we leave no one behind. But I want to turn to you, Kusamita, to talk more about this idea of human flourishing and how you see that from a more holistic standpoint, the way Carl just talked a little bit about it.
Well, holistic, or what some people would call integral. And again, I think it is spelled out in human rights documents, is it's not just the physical and the material. And actually, of course, as I say this, one hero of mine is Pope Francis, actually, and his encyclical Laudato Si that came out in 2015. He said he's addressing it to every person on the planet, not just people who are Christians or to Catholics. And very very clear, very eloquent about human fulfillment is not a matter of just the physical or the material. It's a matter of the cultural, of the emotional, and of the intellectual, and also the spiritual. And he talks about cosmic communion. He talks about spirituality in a number of ways, including our communion with the natural world. And I think that you can find this even in early human rights documents, but it becomes more and more developed as you have, for example, the global ethic of the Parliament of the World's Religions, and you have the Earth Charter, which was finalized in 2000, and it refers a great deal to the beauty of nature, of like how nature gives us, inspires us with wonder, and how we're part of the universe that is evolving with all the different forms of life as well as different cultures. So I think we're seeing an opening out, but it's something that we understand, but we have to, one of the most difficult things with transformation is just attending to it, day by day, right? I don't want to talk too long, but I'm very strong on affirming that rights and duties and responsibilities are a part of each other, that it's the, two sides of the same coin, that rights imply duties and responsibilities, duties imply rights. And so if we have rights to something, someone is, and then there's usually an argument, or could be, about who is responsible to fulfill the rights of anyone. But that means we're responsible to each other. It's mutual, there's reciprocity. People call it the Golden Rule, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says everyone has duties to the community. And it says in the beginning, we should all, it refers repeatedly to the human family, and also we should live towards each other in the spirit of brotherhood and sisterhood, fraternity, you know. So it doesn't actually say love, but it's there,
It's there. Empathy, kindness, it's there. We can say love in this program, that's for sure. But sometimes people don't talk so much about the idea of rights and responsibilities. And sometimes they don't even talk about universal responsibility. There's a large emphasis, I think, on rights, my right, your right, this right, instead of looking at it the way you did. And
This
can
is
you
the Earth,
say, yeah?
this is the Earth Charter, and its central principle is universal responsibility.
So I'm, thankful that you brought that up, because when we speak about rights, sometimes we really need to understand what are responsibilities, what is my responsibility, and then what is the collective responsibility. And the question is, what is universal responsibility? So, this is another layer of it that I think sometimes just gets so brushed under the carpet. And part of our understanding, I think, in having dialogues is feeling the potential that we have in fulfilling our personal responsibilities, but then the responsibility collectively with others. And I think that goes back to a sense of consciousness too, as well as conscience, because I think that a lot of human rights predicates itself upon people with a sense of conscience. How do you feel? Carl, what do you think about those concepts?
Well, you know, sometimes there are two things that one thing that I'm a big follower of in terms of humanity's future, and that is cities, because that is where most people, they say, will live statistically in the next 10 years or so. It feels like that's the way it is now.
It is, yeah.
But we we have to get along in cities. There are so many things that have to be done for the betterment of all, whether it's transportation, um, whether it's economic justice. And unfortunately, I think some things will happen and are beginning to happen that we just will not be able to not think about each other about. We are be seeing, and we just had one, I think in the last week, we had like a 1,000-year weather thing. We're beginning to have weather that is affecting everybody. And it doesn't make a difference if you live on the street or in a mansion. Bad weather will bring us, but we don't want it. Everyone knows we shouldn't let it get to that, but it's getting to that. Or in, do you know about Kensington in Philadelphia? It's a neighborhood. I mean, imagine this in 2024. It's a neighborhood where people who are struggling roam the streets like on drugs and whatnot. And it's in a major city in the United States. It's not hidden. It's in the open. And these are things that break my heart. And to your question about conscience, what do we need to have things not happen like that? But obviously if it is, then that means the systems that we have to manage those spaces are they are not valuable. They are not accurate in what they set out to do. And those are the things that kind of break your heart, and you just have to stop and say, can we not reflect on this as a community and make it different?
Thanks for bringing up Kensington, because on that note, I want to bring up what you talked about systems. I think there is a failure in systems, but also in structures too. And we can see that, especially in the United States. I want to use the example of the toxic water in Flint, Michigan, where there were communities of color where the youngsters and some of the adults were poisoned by the lead because the piping that carried the water became so old that the lead leached into the water, and these young children, I mean, it's heartbreaking, the thousands and thousands of young children who suffered and still experience and suffer cognitive deficits, physical deficits, because of the toxic poisoning, the poisoning of lead in these communities. And this is still going on in many other communities in Jackson, Mississippi. I could go on and on about that. But yeah, I mean, the question is, how do we change systems and the structures that are in place? There may be some people with conscience and who want to do very good things, and sometimes it's beyond their ability to do it. And then sometimes we even have what we call in our system, at least I can say that, whistleblowers, right, who expose these things, and they are not taken seriously, or they're punished for bringing to light dire situations that affect so many. They're trying to do something right. So it goes back, I think, to a few different things, not only conscience, but the systems that we have, the structures in place, including economic structures, the justice system that we have that works for a few and not for everybody. I can definitely attest to that. Um, but I want to try to leave on a more positive note and to go ahead, Kusumi, to lead us out.
Well, I'm not going to lead us out, but when you talk about systemic and structural ethical issues, moral issues, history shows that there's one way to solve a systemic moral problem, and that is organize. We have to organize on a broad scale and be persistent and be brave. But without large numbers of people, or even smaller numbers of people organizing and doing what movements do when they're well organized, the systems don't change. So revolution doesn't have to be the change of a whole system can be called a revolution. It doesn't have to be violent, but it has to be broad and it has to be deep. And it has to be based on very well understood values and on content, on telling the truth, you know, and making sure that's part of the movement, that like what's actually happening, and you can demonstrate on evidence that this is happening, connecting the dots, giving the evidence and the content. Got to get that circulating. And I often think about this. Why are dictatorships and oppressive powers so concerned about education, about what journalists say, you know, about what kind of words you use or where you can speak, and, you know, now on the internet. So so, yeah, well, systemic problems call for organization, organized movement. And that's true.
Appreciate that. Yeah, appreciate that good reminder. Absolutely.
It's been true with regard to women, that's for sure.
Broad and deep. Absolutely. Carl, you're shaking your head.
Yeah, you know, before we go, let me share a couple of ways that the Baha'i faith looks at the world, right? The unity of humankind and elimination of prejudice, equality of women and men, universal education, which is a discussion happening in the United States right now, freedom of religion and conscience, the elimination of extremes of wealth and poverty, and global citizenship, right? We're all citizens of planet Earth, but so I was motivated by what Kusumati just said, because you know how the Baha'i community tries to bring this into being, these things into being, is by where we are, where we reside, where we work, to interact with the people around us, our neighbors, our community members, and to talk about these things and get together about these things. So it means having a gathering in your living room talking about what is our particular, what are our concerns and how can we work together, because you know, in a city like I live in, New York, one block can have, you know, thousands of people, and in that block there may be 10 groups with different concerns, but you try to help get people get together and have meaningful, life-changing experiences, rather than in a society like the United States, you know, more commercial, fun-filling exercises, which, you know, make us have fun, but not maybe change society and the things that we think about. We do have the ability to change things, but we have to get together and talk about those things and actually be willing to take the time to do something about them. It is possible. I have seen it.
I agree that we can be the change we want to see in the world. And I do want to acknowledge you and your organization, because you've hosted so many other groups to come together to talk about pressing issues, to talk about our concerns as NGOs, to talk about engagement within the UN system, you know, and that's a very special role that you've played and that you continue to play. And it's extremely valuable. So, personally and from my organizations, I do want to extend that and to make that acknowledgement. Um, I think that we've had a short but very rich conversation, and we touched upon a lot of different things, which may very well bring up more questions in everyone's minds than anticipated. But that's good because it allows us to reflect and to really think about things about ourselves and how we move in our own life and in the world around us in our spheres of influence. So I want to thank you, Kusamita and Carl, for being here today and joining me. And I so appreciate the opportunity for us to bring our perspective, human rights as human values, to you, to we the world, as you celebrate this 20th anniversary. So thank you so much, and I'll turn it over back to you, Jana.
Well, thank you all so much for what you're doing in the world and all your thoughts. It was really amazing. I really appreciate it. And thank all of you for watching this and for being a part of the 20th anniversary of 11 Days of Global Unity. Please go to we.net to get involved and even make a contribution if you want. Let's go from a me society to a we society. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.